Welcome to another edition of DX Engineering Videos. We're here today in Tallmadge, Ohio, and we're very excited to have our guest, Dave Pascoe, KM3T. Hi, Dave.
Hey, Tim. Good to be here.
It's nice to have you. Dave, you've done a lot of things in amateur radio over your career, but a lot of people probably don't know how you got started. How did it get started for you?
Well, when I was a high school student, I started off as a shortwave listener. Then spent about a year in CB radio. And then in high school, one of the CB guys that I knew said, "You really ought to take your ham radio test." So he threw a book at me and he said, "Ridley Junior High School, Friday night, that's when the exams are. And by the way, you got to learn the Morse code." So this was 1980, went to Ridley Junior High, took the exam, did the Morse code, the 5-word-a-minute test, got my novice, and then I upgraded from there. And got my extra in '83.
So in 1980, how old were you?
I was 17-ish, somewhere around. Yeah.
17?
I was a junior
in
high school.
Where is Ridley High School?
So that's just outside Philadelphia. I grew up in the city in South Philly.
Okay.
So South Philly Amateur Radio Club. Yeah.
So you go through high school, you're into ham radio, you get your extra class, having fun. So what about college? What goes on there?
So I went to University of Pennsylvania from high school. I went to Central High in Philadelphia, and ham radio was actually the reason that I got interested in engineering. So I went there, got my bachelor's in EE, and then later on when I moved to New England, I got my master's later going at night. It took much longer to get that than it took to get the bachelor's. So that was it. But it was really ham radio that got me really interested in engineering. I don't know that I would have taken that path if it wasn't for ham radio. So it was a huge, I'm sure like you, just a huge thing that kind of pushed me in that direction.
So in your 20s and 30s, tell me about your work career, tell me about what's going on in ham radio in your life.
So I got really involved in contesting fairly early on. I stumbled on contesting through a VHF contesting actually in the beginning, and then got more involved in HF. And it was kind of a fluke thing. I was tuning around on 2-meter sideband, and it was June, and all this activity was on one weekend, and I wasn't really tuned into what was going on, and I discovered that was a radio contest. So I was like, wow, this is cool. There's actually people on, really active. And then got involved with the Frankfurt Radio Club and started operating at some of the stations around the Philadelphia area. And then later on, I would move to Maryland and got involved with Frank Donovan, W3LPL, and operated at his old station. And then 1 year into that, he pulled out some blueprints and said, "Yeah, we're building this new house and this new station." So I was heavily involved with him back in 1986, helping to build that station. Learned a lot too from Frank. So work took me around different places. I worked in the DC area for a few years. Was doing communications consulting and some other things. Spent a year and a half at the White House working on communication systems there, and a lot of interesting things. Some hams were on our team there, some that I still stay in contact with. And then moved to Boston in late 80s and got involved in the Yankee Clipper Club and a bunch of stations up in the New England area. KC1XX, probably one of the more notable ones, but operated a bunch of different places. So done a lot of multi-op, a lot of single-op contesting, and it's all been great. It's all different flavors of the game, and it's all good.
So we go through the mid-90s, and this thing called the internet comes around. And you played a part in a couple of websites, amateur radio websites.
Yep.
So why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, back in the mid-90s, Bill Fisher, W4AN, started a little internet provider down in Georgia, and I got involved helping him. I already had some experience in networking and security and a bunch of different stuff, so I helped him get things off the ground, and then that just kind of turned into a whole bunch of other things, and then he came up with an idea for a site called eham.net. So I've always been kind of in the background of eham, or really as a kind of a technical advisor. I didn't write any of the website. I kind of took care of a lot of the infrastructure around it in the early days, and to this day I still help them a bit with that. But yeah, I was kind of introduced to the internet in the late 80s. Well, what it was back then, it was sort of the transition from DARPANET or the ARPANET rather, to what was really early dial-up internet networking, and there weren't a lot of people on it. You know, we actually, I was with Trey N5KO, we started the contesting.com mailing lists, which a lot of people still use to this day, and that was in the early 90s. And of course now things have really changed, but those things, you know, email still love it, hate it, but it's kind of the lowest common denominator. It's the way that people still communicate, and you can reach everybody that way. So I was involved in that and a whole bunch of other sites through professionally and, you know, through ham radio. Today I help out the Reverse Beacon Network team with mainly with scaling and troubleshooting. So I'm kind of a janitor, more of a janitor, and I guess an architect to some extent. But
well, when you're talking about maybe some of the things that you've done from an architectural standpoint, you have a love of flying.
Yep.
And you launched a website that every once in a while, when there's a disaster in the airline world, you see your website gets a lot of publicity. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, this was another thing that was kind of a collision of hobbies. This time, two different hobbies instead of just a radio hobby. LiveATC.net was born 15 years ago, and it was about a year after I started flying, and I was working on getting my instrument rating, and I couldn't hear the radios that were 50 miles away, and my brother let me put some radios at his house that was 6 miles away, and then we said, all right, well, might as well put those on the internet, and did that, and then it's just kind of grown. It's been a great, you know, crowdsourcing story, and now we have receivers all over the world, every corner of the world, and we have couple thousand channels of listening to air traffic control. So people walking around on their phones in airports listening to it, and you know, there's all kinds of. It's an interesting dynamic because there's a gigantic audience, and they're all different. They're not just pilots; they're passengers, they're reporters, they're people who are keeping track of their kids who are off at flying school.
Right.
I get when one of our channels out in Arizona goes down, I get emails from parents in Germany because there's a lot of Lufthansa training going on out there. And the parents are, oh, what happened? The channel's down. I can't hear my kid. So it's really, it helps people kind of connect with flying, and it's been a lot of fun. But ham radio, I think, and the engineering, the communications engineering background played a big role in actually architecting that whole thing and making it so that we can get these receivers out there and actually make them work. Because it's all AM and it's in the VHF band where there's a lot of noise and an increasing amount of RFI. So it's not like the much higher frequencies where the noise is much lower. So we have a lot of things that we have to do to kind of make reception optimized. But it's fun. It's really a labor of love, and it's to build something like that and to really keep it going. I think you really have to have a love for the radio part of it because it's so critical. If that stuff doesn't work, then there's just nothing. It doesn't matter if your website works, it doesn't matter if your mobile apps are working. The core of it is those channels, they have to be there.
Right. Now, here a few weekends ago, you were huddled up in a station in New Hampshire in the CQ Worldwide Phone Contest, and much like you've done for the last 35 years of your amateur radio life. And is the thrill still there? I mean, is the fun still there, or is the fire bright? Yeah, the fire's still bright.
You feel over the years the fire will, kind of die a little bit here and there. But then, especially for CQ Worldwide, when that weekend comes around, both those weekends really, the fire just comes right back, and you start looking at all the signs, the way the weather's turning, and just coming here this afternoon, looking at the snow coming down, you just feel it's November. The absolute best contest is coming up, and it just brings back all those memories and the camaraderie of, especially do a lot of multi-op contesting, but that camaraderie is something that that's what really lasts. But the radio stuff is just as powerful. Once Zero Zulu rolls around on Friday night, you're just in a zone, and you're there for 48 hours, and it's a great, I mean, it's a great escape from our everyday lives, but we wouldn't keep doing it if it wasn't amazing. You know, if it wasn't amazing that you could sit down with a bunch of antennas, even wire antennas, and communicate with people all around the world without wires connecting you. So that, to this day, remains amazing to me, and I've always been fascinated by it. I've learned a lot about it, and it's going to continue to be fascinating, I think, forever. Because if you have that bug, it's there.
It's there. And you got the bug, and it's still cooking. So we'll look forward to more updates in the future.
Okay.
Dave, thanks very much for coming in today to talk to us here at DX Engineering. And thanks to all of you having another view of DX Engineering videos. 73.